Hello, and welcome to Principles of Micro with James Bland. This is video 2 of at least 2 on market efficiency. And I'm just going to start with a brief recap of where we finished off with video 1. Okay, so here is our supply and demand diagram. And we worked out that in equilibrium, okay, so this bit brings us back to chapter 4. In equilibrium, the benefits that consumers get out of participating in a market is equal to the area between the demand curve and the price that consumers pay, which, since we don't have any taxes here, is just equal to the equilibrium price. And the benefits that producers get out of participating in markets is equal to the area between the price that sellers receive, which again is just the equilibrium price because we don't have any taxes, and the supply curve. So this is producer surplus here, and that's equal to that area here. And what we're doing here is adding these up, and we have this thing called total surplus, which is equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Okay. Now the question we're going to try to answer in this video is the market doing a good job of maximizing total surplus? Well, to begin with, why would we want to maximize total surplus? Well, given the assumptions we made at the start of the previous video that all the benefits of a trade go to the person who consumes it, and all of the costs of a trade go to the producer, then consumer and producer surplus are all the benefits of trade. And so if we want to maximize the value of a market to society, we want to try and make this total area, right, the red area plus the blue area, total surplus, which, I may as well highlight for you. The total surplus is, this big triangle here. Is the market making that area as big as possible? Okay, so let's have a think about how we could do this with a thought experiment that in economics we call the benevolent, the benevolent social planner. And so the benevolent social planner is going to choose quantity with the goal of maximizing total surplus. Okay, so you can think about this as a centralized planner who, instead of allowing the market to do its thing, instead tells producers whether they will be producing or not, and then takes what is produced and allocates it to consumers. Okay, so you might think about this as a more socialized version of an economy, but we're going to think about this as a thought experiment to try and compare, well, what's the best we can do if we had this sort of all-seeing, all-knowing, all-loving social planner, benevolent at least, and is the market doing anything close to what the benevolent social planner would do if they were in charge? Okay, so here we're going to be doing some things that we can't do in markets, but it's a thought experiment to provide us with a benchmark to see, are markets performing well, in the sense of, are they doing anything close to what we could achieve if we forced people to do things. Okay, so let's have a think about 3 separate problems. Okay, so the first one is, given given a quantity, who should produce it? Okay. So suppose we want to produce a particular quantity. Who should produce that? Okay, so if we're trying to maximize total surplus, the bit that we're trying to, the bit of this problem that will help us with this is to minimize the cost of producing Q. Okay? And so we're going to be able to answer this question just by looking at the supply curve. Okay, so here's quantity, here's price, here is a supply curve, and now I'll go to a different color. Okay. So remember that the height of the supply curve we can interpret as the marginal cost of producing an item. Okay? And suppose that this is the quantity that we want to produce. And so the marginal cost of producing that item, if we did it efficiently, which we'll get to, will be over here. But suppose, well, what are some other ways that we could produce things? I mean, we could get, these producers to produce that quantity, or we could get these producers to produce that quantity. But what we already know from this problem is that the most efficient way, so this is a production efficiency story, the most efficient way to produce that quantity is to get the sellers with the lowest marginal costs to produce them, right? So that's everyone to the left of the quantity on the supply curve, right? Okay, so if we want to produce a particular quantity, and we were this benevolent social planner, what we want to do is make the lowest marginal cost sellers produce it. Okay. And just as a reminder, markets are already doing this, right? If we had a demand curve coming in to pin down this quantity, then all of the low-cost sellers would be producing, and all of the high-cost sellers, they're the ones up here, would not be producing. Okay, so markets already solve this problem for us, right? We might be able to implement it by being this benevolent social planner, some benevolent dictator. But markets are already doing this for us, okay? So I think you see where I'm going here, but let's work out the second problem. Okay, so we've worked out, given that we want to produce a particular quantity, who should produce it? Well, that's the lowest cost sellers, and that's what markets do. Our second question is, if we want to produce a particular quantity, if we want to consume a particular quantity, given the quantity, who should we allocate it to? Okay, and so this is going to be a demand side question. So let's draw a demand curve. Okay, now remember the relevant interpretation of the demand curve in this section is that the height of the demand curve is the marginal value to a particular consumer, right? So there's a consumer on this part of the demand curve that gets this marginal value if they buy the item. We're not thinking about prices here because we have a social planner who's just forcing people to produce and then allocating it. But we have consumers along here with particular marginal values, and if they get the item, that's their benefit. Okay, so let's put in here a particular Q star. Okay, that's the quantity we want to produce. And essentially, if we've got that quantity, if we're going to allocate it in a way that maximizes the value to society, what we want to do is give it to the consumers that have the highest value for that item. Okay, and those are the consumers on the highest parts of the demand curve. Okay, so, excuse me, markets already do this, right? But if we were this social planner that we're trying to achieve this, right, we would want to give that quantity, allocate that quantity to consumers with the greatest marginal values of the good. And just to drive home, so you can the point that markets are already achieving this. Suppose we had a supply curve coming through here. So in fact, the market was trading this quantity. The market would make sure that these consumers were the ones who were getting the good, and these consumers were not. Right? So markets already do this. Okay, so I'm running out of a bit of time with my Screencast-O-Matic, so I am going to stop here and watch out for video 3 of this section on market efficiency. I'm James Bland. Have a good one.